As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So the Senate on Wednesday overwhelmingly voted down an amendment to the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act that would declare that NATO's Article 5 does not override congressional war powers. And Article 5 is what outlines mutual defense commitments. So the amendment was introduced by Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, and it reads, quote, "It is the sense of Congress that Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty does not supersede the constitutional requirements that Congress declare war before the United States engages in war," end quote. So seems simple enough for people that have, vowed to uphold the Constitution. You would think they would approve this. This is something that should be the case. But no, the amendment failed in a vote of 16 to 83, and it received no support from Democrats, so only Republicans voted in favor. Paul wrote on Twitter after the vote, quote, "It should have been an easy vote to affirm the Constitution. To vote against affirming the Constitution actually places doubt in the Constitution, but it was defeated," end quote. The Senate also voted on an amendment introduced by Senator Tim Kaine, Democrat from Virginia, that requires Senate approval for a president to leave NATO in a vote of 65 to 28. So that amendment passed pretty overwhelmingly. This amendment that, they want to vote on leaving NATO, but they don't want to vote on going to war. No, let's just, jump right into a war if a NATO country gets attacked. So this amendment introduced by Tim Kaine, it reads, quote, "The president shall not suspend, terminate, denounce, or withdraw the United States from the North Atlantic Treaty, except by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, provided that 2/3 of the senators present concur," end quote. All right, the next one here, Russia warns ships against heading to Ukraine. So Russia warned on Wednesday that starting on July 20th, which is Thursday, it would consider all ships in the Black Sea heading to Ukrainian ports as carrying military cargo now that the grain deal has been terminated. So the implication there is that they could be potential targets. The Russian Defense Ministry said, quote, "Given that the Black Sea Initiative has come to an end and the maritime humanitarian corridor has been terminated, all ships going across the Black Sea to Ukrainian ports will be considered potential carriers of military purpose cargoes, starting from 12 a.m. Moscow time on July 20th, end quote. So according to TASS, the ministry said that it would consider the flag states of ships traveling to Ukraine as a party to the conflict. So Zelensky has said that the export of Ukrainian grain through the Black Sea could continue without Russia's participation in the deal, but I would bet that this Russian warning will likely scare shipping companies away. And Russia also announced on Wednesday that it launched a second day of strikes against the Ukrainian Black Sea port city of Odessa. Russia said the missile and drone strikes hit military targets and fuel infrastructure, while Ukrainian officials said the Russian bombardment hit grain infrastructure. Russia ramped up strikes after the Ukrainian attack on the Crimean Bridge, which happened on Monday. So Washington and Moscow are accusing each other of dangerous and unprofessional military activity in Syria. The Kremlin has issued a series of complaints in the past week that American military aircraft were operating in areas used by civilian airliners. Oleg Gurinov, the deputy chief of the Russian Center for Reconciliation on the Opposing Parties, says the American warplanes create a dangerous situation for civilian aircraft. Additionally, Moscow says that American forces stationed at the Al-Tanf garrison, a U.S. military base on the Iraq-Syria border, have used air defenses, further endangering civilian planes. Gurinov said, quote, "Moreover, the coalition's forces carried out exercises involving the use of air defense systems in the Al-Tanf area," end quote. So what he's claiming is that a Russian fighter jet created an unsafe situation for an American spy plane. He reported the incident occurred on Saturday when a U.S. MC-12 conducted operations in support of the coalition's Defeat ISIS mission was closely approached by a Russian Su-35 against established norms and protocols, end quote. He described the Russian fighter jet's actions as creating the dangerous situation for the Americans on board the spy plane. The U.S. plane was forced to fly through its wake turbulence, and this is a manned spy plane, not a drone, because there's been other encounters with drones. And this is, kind of concerning that we keep hearing about this. This is for a few weeks now, they've been trading accusations because the U.S. presence in Syria is always a potential tripwire for a conflict with Russia. And now that tensions have become so much higher between the two countries, something could really happen over there. Kyle makes the point that the U.S., Russia is an ally of the Syrian government, and the U.S. is occupying a good chunk of eastern Syria against, the government's wishes. So much for sovereignty. The U.S. doesn't care about sovereignty. If it, is in their interest to violate the country's sovereignty. So that is a big difference between the two military presences in the country. All right, the last one here, the House votes to say that Israel is not an apartheid state. So this is from Mondo Weiss, and it's titled Vast Majority of House Democrats Back GOP Resolution Saying Israel is Not an Apartheid State. So on Tuesday, the House of Representatives overwhelmingly passed a resolution declaring that Israel is not a racist or apartheid state. The final vote was 412 to 9, with one present vote. So the resolution was a GOP effort introduced by Republicans. It was developed as a rebuke to comments made by Representative Pramila Jayapal. She's a Democrat from Washington. I believe she's the head of the Progressive Caucus. She called Israel a racist state while she was addressing Palestine activists. And she has since walked those comments back and claims that she was merely referring to Israel's current right-wing government and not the country overall. She put out a big statement apologizing, just like she did when they issued that letter calling for President Biden to, think about diplomacy with Russia. So the 9 Democrats that voted against the resolution were Rashida Tlaib, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, Summer Lee, Cori Bush, Ayanna Pressley, Andre Carson, Delia Ramirez, and Belly McCollum. I wish there were some Republicans in there, but they all voted for it. This is a reaction to what Jayapal said, and it also came as Isaac Herzog, the Israeli president, was visiting the U.S. and Biden speaking with Netanyahu. It just goes to show that it's still the vast, vast majority of Congress is all in on supporting Israel. It doesn't matter that they just had that big raid in Jenin, that they've killed over 200 Palestinians this year, that, the judicial overhaul thing, none of that matters. Let's keep giving them that $3.8 billion in military aid each year.
The Peter Schiff Show.
I think the main reason the stock market is rallying, other than, just all the hype around AI, some of which is probably not hype, but a lot of it is, being excessively priced into the market. But I think it's all the weak economic data that continues to come out, particularly out of the manufacturing side. But I think investors are looking at all this data and concluding that the Fed is done hiking. And even if it's not done, there aren't many hikes left. And the data is so weak that the markets are starting to price in cuts. And it's the expectation of rate cuts that I think is responsible for the market. And I also think investors are concluding that even if the Fed's rate hikes are not enough to reduce inflation, that a recession will do the Fed's job for it. That if we finally get a big downturn in the economy, particularly in the labor markets, that's going to bring the inflation rate down to 2% or lower. And so the markets are, excited about that and starting to price that in. But I think they're completely wrong. I think they're correct in that the economy is weak, but it's not going to reduce inflation. I think if anything, the next recession is a catalyst for a leg higher in inflation, as much larger budget deficits result in even more money printing and a real return in earnest to quantitative easing. In fact, I think that just the widening budget deficits and the explosion in the net interest cost to the government is going to cause the Fed to step up the money printing. So I think it's going to be stagflation. It's going to be a weaker economy, but much stronger inflation. And that is not a positive environment for the markets, particularly a lot of the growth-oriented type tech names. The types of stocks that investors should be buying that are really inflation sensitive are the ones that they're still ignoring. Well, the Fed is not honest. Even if the Fed thought a severe recession was coming, it wouldn't admit that. It would try to put a smiley face on it and hope that positive talk would mitigate the severity of the downturn. But we're going to have a major economic contraction because we have to work off really 20 years of excesses that were the consequence of artificially low interest rates. I mean, the excessive debt and consumption and speculation has come at the expense of serious damage to the underlying structure of the economy. And all this has to be worked out one way or the other. And so it's going to be a very painful process that is going to be elongated by government's efforts to mitigate it and get in the way, because the recession is the market's method of repairing the damage that was done as a result of all the malinvestments and misallocations that were a consequence of the Fed's manipulation of interest rates. But when the government tries to push back against that correction, it just elongates the process and makes it more painful, which is what we've been doing. Every time we start to see a problem, we slash rates and print money. We just saw several large banks fail, and a lot more would have already failed had the Fed not stepped up and backstopped everything. But that doesn't mean we're out of the woods. I mean, all of the problems that resulted in Silicon Valley Bank or Signature Bank or whatever going under, those problems are there throughout the entire banking industry. All you have to do is think about all of the mortgage refinancings that occurred over the last 5 or 6 years, where you've got all these 30-year mortgages in the threes. That's great for the borrowers, but what about the banks that are holding all that paper? They're underwater. They're losing a ton of money on these mortgages. Think about all the commercial mortgages that were extended, where the collateral has collapsed, where commercial real estate values have been halved or down even more than that. So you have all this negative equity in all these loans that the banks are holding on to. Plus, the banks also have large portfolios of government, treasuries, where they own 10 to 30-year maturities, again, where they're collecting 1% and 2% interest, in a 5% environment. So they're losing a lot of money on these loans. Meanwhile, everybody is loaded up with debt. Student loans now are getting close to $2 trillion just there. Credit card debt, record territory. Everybody has debt. Corporations, just went on a debt binge during the era of cheap money, and their balance sheets are at risk dramatically as all this low-yielding debt matures into a higher rate environment. And look at the federal government. I think interest on the national debt right now is $600 to $700 billion a year. That's double where it was about a year ago. By the end of this year, it'll be about $1 trillion. By the end of next year, the U.S. government will be paying $2 trillion a year in interest on the national debt, which will be about $35 trillion by the end of next year, headed for $40 trillion, probably in another year or two from there. And that's if interest rates don't even go up. What if rates keep rising? What if they go to 7% or 8%? So this is a huge debt bomb that's going to explode. And so people are yanking the money out of banks and buying money markets. So they're lending their money to the U.S. government at 5%. And so the banks are losing all their capital, in addition to the value of their loans going down. The whole banking sector is completely insolvent, thanks to what we've done over the last decade or so by loading up these banks with all this long-term, low-yielding debt. And we had all these deposit insurance, so nobody really cared about what the banks were doing with their money because it was all insured by the government. But now, though, that people have seen these large banks fail, and the government has said, look, we're not necessarily going to cover your bank if you have more than the FDIC amount. It's a case-by-case situation. We're going to have to evaluate the systemic impact. The message that sends is, if you're a customer of a small bank, a regional bank, a community bank, and you've got a large account, you just better get your money out. There's no reason to leave it there. They can't pay you enough interest to compete with a money market. And what if the bank fails? You may be, SOL. And so there's a huge run, on these banks. So they're all going to fail. And the government, obviously, if it wants to bail out every one of these banks, the only way it can do it is by destroying the value of the deposits because of massive inflation, because the money to bail out the banks has to be created by the Fed. That's the only way they're going to get it. The FDIC doesn't have any money compared to the trillions of deposits. And so it doesn't even matter if your bank fails. You're going to lose money if you have a bank account, because either the bank's going to fail because the government doesn't bail it out and you're going to lose your deposits, or the government bails out your bank and your deposits lose their value because inflation destroys the purchasing power. So no matter what happens, people are going to lose a tremendous amount as this banking crisis unfolds.
Your daily dose of Liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
All right, so in the case of Prospera, you're saying that in principle there could be a Prospera in this or that region of the world. There's a part of the video in which you say that it's less a physical place than it is, I don't know, maybe an approach to government and society. So maybe we should start there. You actually visited the place in Honduras. Now, not that I'm an expert on the geography of Honduras, but where actually in the country is it?
So Prospera, their first location is on an island called Roatan, which is off the coast of Honduras. It's a tourist destination. People go there to go scuba diving or, stay at a resort.
Cruise ships pass through there too.
Cruise ships pass through there a lot. That's right. And so that was appealing to them, they told me, just because it's already got some tourism baked into the infrastructure. There's an airport there that's pretty easy to use from the US. There's direct flights from Miami, for instance. So that is where I went. I had visited Honduras back in 2014 when this was first in the works. The law that authorized these kind of zones, which are known in Honduras as ZERES, this kind of, when you translate it to English, it's more or less zones for economic development. And that passed in 2013. So I first visited the mainland in 2014 to see a couple of sites where they were thinking of building some of these. It was all purely theoretical back then. I even visited Roatan and kind of saw some jungle that later would become what I just visited. So 9 years later, there's actually something to look at, which was an interesting journey for me.
Yeah, so you've had an opportunity to go there, as I said, with Jim, and that was how you were able to make this video. You were able to talk to people. How, though, just going back into the history of it, how does somebody start something like this? What's the process? Do they negotiate with the government of Honduras? I mean, presumably they'd have to.
Well, so what happened was in 2013, the Honduran Parliament, Honduran Congress passed a law known as the ZA law, which the context of all this is Honduras is an extremely dangerous country. Back when I visited in 2014, it was actually the largest city there, Tegucigalpa, was the murder capital of the world. It had the highest per capita murder rate. Vast swaths of it are run by narco gangs or were run by narco gangs. The ease of doing business, if you look at rankings, it's always way near the bottom. Kind of contract enforcement is very weak. Rule of law is really bad. And they had just had a very tumultuous change of power where their previous president was more or less ousted by a military coup because he tried to illegally call a referendum to kind of allow his term to be extended. And so because of all that, they were in a sense more open to trying a radical fix because there was this emerging charter city movement. This intellectual economist, Paul Romer, kind of came up with the original idea of the charter cities. And they pitched some influential people there and said, look, instead of endlessly trying to reform this corrupt state you've got going here, what if you just carved out some little zones, granted them some level of autonomy, and then either private companies or the original idea was even it would kind of be overseen by foreign governments could come in and like apply a template that we know works. We know that in Singapore with this set of property rights protections and business regulations and tax code, it creates prosperity. So you could import the Singapore model, you could import the Dubai model, you could import the Canada model, which is where Paul Romer was from. No one went for that version. But that was the idea that was pitched. The Congress that had just booted the former president was more sympathetic to that. The new president who came in was behind it. So it really started gaining a lot of momentum. And Prospero was one of 3 that got approved pretty early on. Then lots of applications flowed in, but for political reasons that we can talk about more, those never got approved. So Prospera is one of the only ones that's actually started to come to fruition at this point.
Can that person just move here? Is there any obstacle to going there any more than there would be to moving to any other part of the physical territory of Honduras?
For them, it's easier than anyone. Anyone from around the world can apply to become part of Prospera Zete. And they have different kind of tiers of membership. They've got what are called e-residents, where you don't actually live there year round, but you're able to visit a certain number of times a year and you pay a certain annual fee to be an e-resident. They have about 600 e-residents so far. And then they've got 200 to 300 workers. Most of those are from Honduras, either people that come from the mainland and work construction jobs, or they've got people who are being remote workers. So we're in the age of remote work now. So there's higher skilled people that companies have set up remote offices there in Prospera because it's advantageous to them. And local Hondurans are going into the office in Prospera, working for a Canadian company, and then going home. And the native Hondurans, they get a discount. So it's about $1,300 for an outsider. That's the annual fee to be part of Prospera. Native Hondurans, it's about an 80% discount. So it's about $250, $260 to join. And anyone who wants to can opt in. That's the entire idea behind the whole premise, is that it's all voluntary opt-in and opt-out.
Let's say I'm somebody who lives in Honduras. I'm familiar with the society and I want to make a change. How is my life improved by this new free city or whatever we might call it?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that is the entire point of the Congress authorizing this. Was it was sold as a way to improve the lives of a country where not just poverty, but extreme poverty is rampant. And I saw a lot of that firsthand when I was there. The thing about a place like Roatan, you go there as a tourist and if you stay on the resort, you don't really understand what's going on. But if you wander outside of that a little bit, people are living in places, it's dirt floors, it's no running water, it's just extremely primitive stuff. There's a fishing village adjacent to Prospera. And Jim and I went and visited some of the neighbors, both on Roatan, and then they've opened another site right across the sea there on the mainland. And most of the people we talked to said they're bringing jobs. We like them. There's one community there where there's a little bit of tension. because some of the political leaders there are afraid that the ZA is going to expropriate their land, like eminent domain them, basically. And I totally understand where their fears are coming from because they live in a country where the government is constantly expropriating land. So there's that anxiety there, especially among the more, I'd say, like politically aware, politically active people. But most of the just kind of normal people living there, they all seemed happy because they look over there and they see jobs being created. They see a 14-story tower being built, the tallest on the island. They see things getting done in a country where there's a lot of red tape, there's a lot of corruption that stops things from getting done.
Well, here's one of the key.
I'm interested in this idea because it's a peaceful way to carve out a little bit of liberty, a little autonomous zone where the decision-making truly is made on a voluntary basis. But the reason it's never been tried, I guess, is that there's always the bigger government with all the guns who can come in and take it. So that's why I think this is so high stakes. What happens to Prospera one way or another is kind of like, it's a proving ground for, can we try this? Like, if this can work in a place like Honduras, maybe it's actually easier to work other places. There's ideas to do it here in the United States. If it doesn't work, that might be, strangling the baby in the cradle.
On an article in Zero Hedge, it says Biden DOD lets transgender service members skip deployments. Just say, will receive indefinite physical fitness waivers. Well, if they don't want to go to war today, we'll do it tomorrow. But that'd be a good idea.
Yeah, really.
And many other things, and we'll probably even go over the list of crazy stuff to go on. So we'll go back to the question: why do they do these kind of things? Can this benefit the military? Can it benefit society? Can it promote liberty? And all these kind of things. So a memo came out just recently, and it's the reason it has come up. It's been around for a while, but nobody saw it. It was, but it wasn't classified. But they sort of kept it secret.
Yeah.
But the dossier has acquired a new Department of Defense DOD memo that goes into great detail. It's a memo, 34 pages on these details on what kind of social conditioning you have to do and you have to change. And I guess they have the muscle to enforce it. I was thinking, maybe if you're thinking about going in, you might not join. And there's a few less people not joining.
Yeah.
But what if you've been in for 23 years and you were going for 25?
Yeah.
Boy, I tell you what, it's just like in corporate industry. Why they don't take chances and be annoyed, and because they can lose benefits, lose their job, be canceled, and all that kind of stuff. So there's always this intimidation and force, and this is what's going on here now. The military is in trouble, recruitment is in trouble, our foreign policy is in shambles, and yet they come along here, and it looks like they want to put the nail in the coffin.
Meet the same standards that men do. They should be able to do it if they want to join the Marine Corps, and that seemed fine. Then it was, we've got to lower the standards a little bit because obviously there are some differences between men and women, and that was basically remove standards altogether. There's no standards. If you want to get in, get in. And here's some of the things that Jordan, and I tried to read the 35-page memo. It was very long, written in kind of legislative language. But thankfully, Jordan did the heavy lifting for us, and here's what he found out in his analysis of this 35-page memo. If we can put the next one on. Jordan writes, and here's some of the highlights found within the document. Taxpayer-funded care, that means free for them, and you pay, for transgender service members includes, here's what they get for free: speech and voice therapy, cross-sex hormones, laser hair removal, voice feminization surgery, facial contouring, body contouring, breast and chest surgery, genital mutilation surgery, psychological counseling. Well, I understand that one. And let's go to the next one because there's more. But wait, there's more. And this is the part that's actually even more important, I think. Service members who identify as transgender may receive a waiver for grooming and uniform standards. Okay. Service members who identify as transgender may receive an indefinite waiver for physical fitness standards. This waiver often becomes a de facto permanent situation, and the transgender identifying service member just has to renew the exemption every 6 months. And here's one that really got me, Dr. Paul. Number 4, service members who identify as transgender will be considered non-deployable for up to 300 days while taking hormones for their transition period. Again, given that these hormones are often required for life, this may render the transgender identifying service member as permanently unable to deploy. So we're going to have a military filled up with people who are permanently exempt from going to fight. That doesn't sound like such a great idea to me.
So this is something that I think it's really major, and I think you said that this is one of the big ones of all this mess that you read. And boy, I'd have to agree with that. This is big. This might be the nail in the coffin of the purpose of the military. And I don't know. It's a struggle to find anything good about it, because this is an extension of a philosophy that's encroaching. It's sort of secondary to all this wokeism at home and post-genderism and all this stuff. So this is a mess that I think is not going to go away until the people decide they've had enough. And maybe it's existing already. Maybe the fact that nobody wants to go anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe it's already started, and that's great. But what we did the other day is express, well, what would the consequence be? How do these people think? Well, we have a draft, and slavery has never been really banned in this country if you happen to be 18 years old and they need you to become a cannon fodder someplace around the world. So no, they enslave people, and that to me is a bad situation. I don't think that the founders intended a military.
Big makeup brand faces boycott calls for using bearded man in lipstick ads. So this was the Amazon Prime days. And they used an influencer to sell, if you can put the next one on, Maybelline. They brought him on board to sell their lipstick and lip gloss and all kinds of other stuff that ladies put usually on their face. And this is from the Daily Caller's write up on it. Maybelline taps bearded man to sell lip gloss, is how they put it. And the whole thing is now there's calls for boycott, as if they hadn't learned from Bud Light, from Disney, from Target. They just keep doing it.
See, I wasn't smart enough to figure out that they were selling lipstick to women. I thought they were selling lipsticks to this 1% transgender people. But anyway, it's back to what I said on our previous issue, in that the end is near. When you see this stuff, something is crazy is going on, and it's values. It has to do with a higher law. It has to do with decency. And what is the goal? And the only thing that I have been able to get into my brain that sounds logical is they have stated in the past about cultural Marxism and Marxism that they can't become Marxists now because there's too many people know the secret of incentives and merit. The idea of merit has come up, and they're talking more about it. They can't stand that, so they can't repair that or systematically remove it. They got to just destroy it, and then when the chaos comes, they're going to move in. But that is something that isn't a conspiracy theory. That's actually written there. Marx talks about it, and they were always looking to destroy the society, and they would rebuild it, and that's how they could get rid of all these people who have incentives to making profits and taking care of themselves.
I have to say,
Okay.
And I'm not a huge fan of modern country music. I like classic country music, Johnny Cash and Texas swing. But anyway, this is a big star. Put this up. This isn't the same thing. Basically the subtitle of "Go Woke, Go Broke." Put this next one on. This is really, I read about this yesterday. It's really big on Twitter right now and yesterday. This fellow's name is Jason Aldean. He's a country music star, modern country. Quote, most contemptible song of the decade. Country Music TV bans Jason Aldean's Try That in a Small Town video. And they did it after huge pressure from the usual media elites. Put the next one on. Here's what happened. Here's how his music was reviewed. Variety's Chris Wellman exclaims in a story titled, Jason Aldean already had the most contemptible country song of the decade. This video is worse. He said, Aldean's Try That in a Small Town is close to being the most cynical song ever written. And the Daily Beast published one of its most high-profile criticisms of the song with the title, Jason Aldean Catches Heat for Racist Pro-Gun Lyrics. A modern lynching song is what they called it. And so let's skip the next one and let's go to the next one, because I read that and I thought, wow, this is pretty heavy duty. What's this guy going on about? This has got to be some really heavy stuff. Go to the next one if you can. Here's the lyrics, and I'm not going to read them all. But basically, sucker punch somebody on a sidewalk, carjack an old lady at a red light, pull a gun on the owner of a liquor store. You think it's cool? Well, act a fool if you like. Cuss out a cop, spit in his face, stomp on the flag and light it up. Yeah, you think you're tough? Well, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. And I thought, okay, that reminds me of Lake Jackson and basically every town in Brazoria County, and I can see it's got a little bit of that redneck feel to it, and people here are proud of that. The other lyric that I didn't put on because it was too long, because it basically said, they say they want to come for our guns. Well, that might fly in the big city, but it won't fly down here, that sort of thing. So when I read all the hype about it being a lynching song, I expected a little bit more than something I would hear literally at any at any coffee shop here in the area.
See, we should be encouraged, no matter what subject it is, has something to do with peace or freedom and prosperity and all. But it doesn't seem to work that way. But for these people who have the loudest speaker right now, you know, they have the bully pulpit, and they call this the most contemptible song of the decade. Now, I don't follow any of this, but you know, I am really interested in it now.
Yeah.
You know, I might even like the music. I don't know. I'll go look at it. But you know, it's over the top again. It's too far gone, and I think they hurt themselves. I think what they do is they destroy their credibility, and they no longer will be viable. You know, pretty soon they'll say, well, we got a good one now. This will do it because we hate a couple people, and we just found out there's going to be 2 indictments today against Trump, and we got to go after him. You know, this sort of thing just over and over. They lose all credibility, you know, and not only do they lose the credibility, sometimes what they're saying backfires. Like I was kidding. Maybe this will increase people. That's I got to go get that song. Yeah. But it's really you know, it's easy for me to look at some of this stuff and divide it into 2 categories: good and evil, you know, and all variations of both sides.
He said, try that in a small town, according to Aldean, is rooted in nostalgia for the tight-knit community he grew up in, where people cared for their neighbors regardless of their background or beliefs. That's just kind of how it sounded to me as well. But the crazy thing is, and actually the reason why this is a good news story, is that they tried to cancel him. They took him off country music television, and he's still #1 on the country charts, #1.
Yeah.
So they helped him.
That got my attention when he was talking about in the community he grew up in. Of course, I think about where I grew up. And a lot of the conversation by the adults had to do with the Depression. I was very young, but they talked about it for a long time. But it was also, you know, the war issue. So those kind of things generally back then, they brought communities together.
Yeah.
That's not it, because they were more justifiable or something. But the atmosphere, the moral atmosphere was so different. It tended to bring communities together. But now it doesn't do that. It's just, oh, this is another opportunity for the blast them. But the results are what really count. So if he's still selling records and still don't want to listen to him, that sounds good to me.
About this today, I didn't realize that Turley wrote about it, and I'm really happy he did, because he puts his unique spin on it. He says, you know, I don't love every one of those lyrics, but, and let's put this next one up. Here's his main point. He says, advocacy groups are now taking credit for country music television canceling Jason Aldean's song. These critics are tone deaf to the implications of such censorship, given our long history of protest songs, as I discuss in today's column. And if you go to the next one, this is from his column. He says, country music singer Jason Aldean's hit single, Try That in a Small Town, secured 2 distinctions this week. It hit #1 in the country charts, and it was pulled by country music television. And he goes on, putting aside CMT's effort to become the Bud Light of music networks, the decision to yield to the intense cancel campaign is an abandonment of the principles of artistic freedom and free speech. Great Turley there. Yeah.
Not complicated either.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't anything like they describe it, because, you know, the end of times are here because they're in charge of the children from day one. You know, this whole thing that people can't take care of themselves morally, independently. They can't care for their retirements. It just, look, the government has rescued a lot of people. There's a couple of side effects. Sometimes the people don't quite make it and they end up on the street. And there's a few people living on the street these days. So that's why, that baffles me sometimes, is I think we in the freedom movement have such an astounding philosophy on what it is like to have individual liberty and have rules of nonviolence, no aggression, and how successful it's been. There's no evidence to show that this authoritarian stuff, this stuff that you're hearing in Washington, you do this, and we have to take care of people. And if you don't, you're the immoral person. Yeah. So if you don't go along with this, you know, if you don't go along with this idea that 2% of the people can dictate what they want by taking away some liberties of the 98%, and that you're the bigot. Yeah. And they've been able to handle, you know, handle that and convince people of that. And of course, that involves social media and a lot of other things. But it really boils down to individuals deciding which side of this they're on, whether they even think of, what is this higher law? You mean people are supposed to know what's right and wrong? Oh no, that's stupid. We gave up on that, just like we gave up on the Constitution a long time ago. You don't want to have the Constitution. That might invite you to think what right and wrong is.